Live from the studio at the Northwest Florida School of Biblical Studies, this is Have a Bible Question, where you are part of the program. Now, let's go to the Bible for answers to your Bible questions.
All right, here we go. Let's move on to the next question. Submit your question. I love having all these questions come in, keep submitting questions. Please do, because it means we kind of move on a little bit now on some of these. All right, Matthew Oklachaney, he puts, the Bible calls us to be sober-minded. Is the use of tobacco and even to the extent of coffee seen as a sin because they are stimulants? I remember a preacher in Arkansas Angels, and that book, by the way, is one that normally have the students read. It's a great, wonderful book. It's about older preachers back in the day in the state of Arkansas. You do know that's the only United States that's mentioned in the Bible.
What? You lost me on that. What?
Arkansas is in the Bible.
Oh, how so?
Noah looked out of the ark and saw. Is that on the level of a dad joke? Are preacher jokes and dad jokes right?
They're about the same. That's right.
Okay. But anyway, I remember a preacher in Arkansas Angels didn't drink coffee because of this. And you can find the quotation, correct me. I remember reading in there was one, he would give up coffee for a period of time even because he wanted to not be addicted to something, to not having power over him. So he would go a period of time without coffee, but then go back to it later if he wanted to. And so that's a good question about the stimulants and the idea of being sober-minded. All right, so
as I take a drink of coffee,
I want to say as we even brought the whole carafe into the studio tonight, sitting over my right shoulder here. All right, so who wants to go first?
Well, I think the passage he's talking about, Titus 2, verse 6, young men likewise exhort to be sober-minded. But if you look up that word, it carries with it the idea of being sane or moderate, to be in one's right mind. In other words, to be in Realville, if you will, or
Realville.
I've never heard that before.
Realville.
Realville.
Yeah, Rush uses that a lot. Yeah.
I love that, Realville, instead of Bizarro World.
Yeah, and to be in the right mind, to be sober or soberly.
What is the word there?
The word is
it Nepho?
Sophronio.
Okay.
Sophroneo.
Wow.
Okay. Well, I was thinking of be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, 1 Peter 5:8.
Oh, yeah.
And that is a different word because it's Nepho, and it's just mean clear-headed, not drunk on this one.
Okay, right.
So anyway.
Right, and what he used the expression sober-minded, and that this is the one that came up. But yeah, the sober, the idea of grave, serious-minded, in other words, to be alert to all the possibilities around you, to be careful.
So
it also says to exercise self-control.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So to lose the idea of self-control. So in the sense of being sober-minded. Now, if you were to take it now, and there's a difference between the word drunkenness versus these words of sober-mindedness.
Yeah.
That we have here. And so I would put alcohol on a different level. Not that you did that, but the question here is sober-minded.
Because alcohol causes inebriation.
Yeah. Impairment. And what we would have to say here on like coffee, I would say coffee. I'll take the tobacco as a separate issue here in a second, but like on coffee or any stimulant, Red Bulls, 5-hour energy drinks, even antidepressants, even depressants, anything that would cause us to not be able to be clear-minded to make good judgment decisions should be avoided, if that's what it is. But generally speaking, coffee doesn't make you, in fact, I would argue it makes me more clear-headed at times.
Yeah.
It depends on how much you drink, because, they do have those little coffee shots, those espresso shots and stuff like that. And they can change alter your emotions and your thinking.
Yeah. If you get to a point that you can't control self, then that would be bad on any type of stimulant you put into your body. Right. Now, to me, one of the things I'll throw out there, and we have to be careful when we say, well, this is how this works in somebody else's body, and how, we say, well, it makes me not to be clear-headed. Coffee actually does make me clear-headed. You can ask my wife about that.
Well,
when I'm in the office,
with play the devil's advocate on you
with ADD, that's the same thing Ritalin does to an ADD person, and that's why a lot of times they're encourage that child, if they don't want to put them on medicine, give them caffeine, because caffeine, what they're doing is they're trying to flood. Kind of the comparison the doctor gave me, it's like flooding a car. Normally you pour gas to something, it makes it do what? It goes fast. But if you pour too much gas to it, what's it do? Flood the engine, make it go dead. That's kind of what caffeine would do to certain people with ADD and some of these problems, is that it floods their system and it slows them down rather than to accelerate them.
Is that kind of like the squirrel? Is that little squirrel on that cartoon show that?
Well, that one made him go faster over the hedge, over the hedge. Yeah. And so, I would be careful on the coffee part. The tobacco, I think is probably something a little bit different, other than I have seen some people use tobacco to keep themselves awake. Go ahead there, Ray, you got something?
Yeah, I'm hiding over here in the corner so you don't ask me questions. What I was thinking is, it's not really, I know a lot of people get into situational ethics and all, but there's different things for different people when it comes to, just like you were talking about, right? So some people take Ritalin and it will focus them and make them sober-minded. Others, if they take it, it can be like a drug and get you to where you're not sober-minded. And it's the same with everything. You find what works for the person, right? Because if you are sick and you have a stuffy head and you're not vigilant, you're not sober-minded because you're so out of it that you can't do anything, you can take cough medicine to clear that up. But then when you're not sick, you don't take cough medicine because it can make you drunk if you take enough of it. And it's all in moderation as to how much you take of these different things, because any stimulant like that, if you take enough, could be considered a drug to where it changes your state. But then the last thing I would say is for the guy in Arkansas Angels that decided he wasn't going to, if it bothers your conscience, if your conscience says it's wrong, then you don't do it with anything that we've talked about.
And I think, you brought up a point, and that's excellent about the conscience aspect. And I would never encourage somebody to do, drink coffee. You don't want to drink coffee, don't drink coffee. And I'm not here trying to defend a practice. I mean, I tend to drink it in the office, in the studio. I sometimes, honestly, if I'm really tired trying to stay awake at night when I'm driving, I'll drink a Mountain Dew, because Mountain Dew will hype me up a little bit. The sugar that you have in there. And so it's not actually the caffeine, it's the sugar that is getting me going to keep me from driving off the roadway. And so he brought up about situationalism. I think sometimes it's not so much always about situationalism, is because sometimes when we say situationalism, we'll just say, well, here's a different situation, it's the same issue. No, there's a difference between drunkenness and medicinal purposes.
Yes.
Paul drew that out. So It's not trying to say, well, based on the situation. No, it's the intent behind are two separate things.
That's right.
And so what is the intent behind what you're doing? Is it for clarity, or is it to impair? Is it to cloud your judgment? And
exactly.
if it's to cloud judgment, then most certainly you wouldn't want to do that.
And I think that goes back to the verse and the word that you brought out, talking about self-control, because there's a specific reason. And we all know we all know that verse that you just alluded to, whenever Paul says to Timothy, no longer drink only water, but use a little wine for your stomach's sake and for frequent infirmities. Now, why was he doing that? He was doing that because it has specific purpose, like what Ray was explaining. What's the intent behind it? Mm-hmm. And intent is a hard issue.
Yeah, and intent is everything. I think sometimes we forget that. Now, not that good intentions make something right.
Right. Yeah.
And you have to be careful when you look at that. But what is the difference between murder and self-defense? Did God draw a distinction in his law?
And there's intent. Right there.
Because in the Old Testament law, he said, if someone is broken into your house, if they are intruding into your home and there's bloodshed at that time, then they're not to be charged. There's no sin there. But if it's the next day, you can't shed blood over that. And what is he saying there? There is a difference here between self-defense, which could involve bloodshed, versus the next day seeking revenge that involves bloodshed. Two separate issues. What's the distinction? The intent. Mm-hmm. And so the motivation behind. And God has always been about the motivation. What is the love?
That's right.
That's what he wants.
And so going back to the question, anything that impairs your judgment that causes a change in your judgment, then you are violating that, no matter what it is.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
And so it could be coffee. It could be those things.
It could be sugar.
I was going to say, it could be Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, that impairs our judgment sometimes if you eat too much, so you got to be careful with and what does that say? We need to live our lives in a way that'll bring glory and honor to God.
Did you bring up a verse? Sometimes we get to talking on here, and it's like, did I think that, or did you say something about that? But the idea of self-control just keeps coming to my mind.
Well, that's it. Mm-hmm. That's inherent in the word. In the word, that's in
temperance.
Yeah, that sophroneo that he's talking about is to be of sound mind, to be in one's right mind, to exercise self-control. Well, the Bible clearly tells us in many verses, self-control, the fruit of the Spirit is one of those, Galatians 5:22 and 23. Yeah,
that's kind of what I was thinking. I mean, that's what we're producing. So anything that we don't have, then if it's not going to produce self-control, then it's probably something we need to avoid, whether it's coffee, whether it's sugar, no matter what it is.
Yeah, I mean, even something as potent and dangerous as morphine, it has a purpose. Whenever it comes to pain, when it comes to surgeries and stuff like that,
we can make you feel good.
Exactly.
It put a smile on my face.
But what's the intent behind that? I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
Not for the highs, not for the impairment.
Mm-mm. But people do that.
Yeah, the misuse of something.
There you go.
That goes back to 10. Anyway. Good question. I hope we answered it to some degree there. If not, put us a comment in here. We'll go back, rehash it a little bit more.